Hello, my name is Jenna Devji. I'm a lawyer at the Government Legal Department and I am co-chair of the Cross Civil Service Senior Disability Network, REACH. Today, I have the pleasure of being joined virtually by Seonaid Webb, Deputy Director and Head of Secondary Legislation in the Constitution and Borders Directorate at DEFRA. Seonaid is also the founder of the Cross Civil Service Working Through Cancer Network. This interview is the second part in a series of workshops entitled Empowering Disabled Staff to Reach Senior Grades. This video will be shared with the Cross Civil Service Disability Network and across civil service widely to benefit disabled people wanting to progress and develop their careers and move into senior grades. I will be asking Seonaid various questions about her career and career development, and also about disability generally. So without further ado, Seonaid, welcome and thank you for being here with us today. First of all, Seonaid, please tell us briefly about your current role and how your career has brought you to this point.
Okay, thank you, Jenna. It's lovely to be asked to do this, so thank you so much for the opportunity. So at the moment, as you mentioned, I'm Head of Secondary Legislation here in DEFRA. What that actually means in practice is that I run the biggest SI programme across government for the transition period as we're leaving the EU. It's a really challenging job, but it's a really exciting and fun job as well, so I'm really pleased that I'm doing it. Before I joined DEFRA, I've been here only a year. I spent 15 years in the Home Office, and in the Home Office I did a huge variety of roles: policy, operational, strategic, lots of different opportunities to test myself in different skills and different environments, and I really enjoyed it. And the last job that I did before I left was head of the Windrush Lessons Learned Review Team, which was probably one of the most challenging, emotional but rewarding jobs that I've done in my career, so I felt very privileged to be part of that as well before I left.
Thank you. And Seonaid, how would you describe yourself?
So it's very hard to talk about yourself, I've found, when I'm trying to think about how to be nice about myself. I would definitely consider that I am motivated and passionate about public service. It's something that I hold very dear, and I never find a dull day working in the civil service. So that's definitely something about me. I'm always keen to work in an environment that's diverse and inclusive, but I'm also keen to make that environment possible. So I think that that's something that also drives me. I'm a very proud mum. I've got 2 children, both teenagers, and I love watching them go through the stages that they're going through into adulthood now. So that's also something I enjoy. And I love nature. So my husband and I, with our dog, we quite often go for a walk, spend as much time as possible outdoors, and I find that really kind of rejuvenating. So that's something I like to do a lot.
Thank you. And can you tell us why or how you became interested in disability rights, and what motivates you to champion the careers of civil servants with disabilities?
Jenna. So this one's a really complicated one in some ways, because I've always been told that I'm a leader who's authentic and that I'm focused on making somewhere a great place to work. So I've always tried to be a listening leader who cares about different characteristics and different challenges that people would face. But I think the first time that I really became very passionate about disability amongst all of the various rights that are really important was when I was diagnosed with cancer in 2016. So I was about to start in my first senior civil service role. So I found out from my oncologist that I had been diagnosed literally the working day before I was due to start my first role. So I had 300 staff who were waiting to see me on the Monday, but on the Friday before that I'd had to call my new manager to say that I wouldn't be in because I had to be rushed for emergency surgery. So you can imagine what that felt like. It was the most devastating moment of my whole life, not one I'd ever want to go through again. I immediately was thinking about my family, but I was also thinking about my career. I'd just literally gotten to senior civil service. I didn't know if I'd have a career anymore. I wasn't sure if I would even be able to work ever again. So in one day, everything comes crashing down and you're not sure how you're going to manage to cope. I know that mental health is something that people don't often associate with a physical disability, but your mental health immediately becomes one of the biggest issues of coping with a physical disability, because with physical disabilities, you have a plan. So for me, I knew I wanted to work. I knew that I was going to have to go through lots of treatment. I had to have surgery, radiotherapy, chemotherapy, and targeted treatment. So I had the full house of bingo, is how I like to call it. I like to have everything. But to work was one thing, and they had a plan. They were going to treat me. But the mental health is something that quite often people don't consider. And my mental health fluctuated a lot over the first 12 months, from a real despair to a real kind of passion that I would get through this and a real motivation to be okay. And obviously with a family and with colleagues around you as well, they're living it with you. So something that I learned very quickly was that if you're somebody with a disability, quite quickly everybody around you feels part of that life as well, and you can't disassociate it. And at work, people care about you, so it's really important that you take that offer of support if it's there, or you ask for it if it isn't there. So that's something that really started to bring home to me that year. And why did I want to work? Well, work was really important because this was an extraordinary time. It was the most extraordinary time of my whole life. And I really wasn't sure how I was going to get through it if I just sat at home. I knew for my own well-being that sitting at home was not going to be a good idea for me. Unfortunately for me, my manager, my team, my colleagues all said that they would help me make it work. So what that meant was I could keep busy and I could have a bit of ordinary, a bit of normality in the extraordinary times. So not everybody can do it and not everybody wants to do it. But if people do want to do it, that was one of my early passions, that we should always make sure that we enable people to work if they want to work, and we can find ways quite often to make that happen. I think one of the other things that was really important to me was, in disability, there are unseen disabilities, invisible disabilities, and there are ones that are quite obvious. So the invisible disability that I had quite often was the mental health that you carry around with you. But for me, I had quite a physical change. So my hair fell out. I was on steroids. So, you know, I had that bloated steroid face. It was very obvious to everyone who knew me that this was happening. So for me, being upfront and honest from day one was really, really important. And again, I know that's something that a lot of people struggle with. And I think I feel quite responsible as a senior manager for leading by example, to say, it's okay to speak up. It's okay to be telling people these changes are happening to you and people will support you. But I know it's a real struggle for people to be able to do that. So I don't take that lightly. But for me, that made a massive difference. Being honest, telling people they could ask me any question. Some of the questions weren't great, and I think I had to say to people sometimes, that's probably not appropriate to ask me that question, but you know, people needed to ask questions, and I think that was better than not asking me anything. So that was really important to me. So I braved, I suppose, showing some of those physical changes, and that was really tough. And I think some days when you just want to hide away, people with disabilities can quite often say they're having bad days sometimes, and you just think, I'd rather be at home actually, because I don't think I can put that brave face on today. And I think that's something that I started to really appreciate, was that what you show to the world isn't always what you're feeling. And trying to go into work on those days was especially tough, and people didn't know why it was tough. So again, the communication is really important. Sometimes you just need to say to people, I'm having a really difficult day and I'm not going to be able to do what I said I was going to do. And again, I appreciate the privilege of being a senior manager. So you have to set the culture to say that that's what I expect of everybody who works in my team. It isn't a privilege I have because of my grade. It's important that everybody feels that they can say that. So that's something, again, that started to come home to me as I was going through this. I think the turning point, the reason that we have a network now, it was never my intention. So Jenny, you and I have spoken before about this, but it's an accidental network. It was never my intention to say what we really need right now is a working through cancer network, because I was going through treatment and it wasn't really at the forefront of my mind. But I then was asked to write a blog. So it was Mental Health Wellbeing Week. It was a joint thing about wellbeing, and in the Home Office, nobody at SCS level, senior civil service level, had been blogging about mental health. So we had quite a few junior members of staff talking about it, but we didn't really have anyone other than the champion himself talking about mental health. So they said, could I do a blog? So I did. And I wrote really openly and honestly about how difficult I had found it. You know, the fact that I had felt really isolated at times, the fact that I'd felt very, very kind of the mortality that it shows you, not knowing if you were going to live or die. That whole feeling is something that never leaves you, actually. Once you've had it, it's always with you. And I said that working was an outlet for me, but equally, I knew that I felt quite... I felt that it had been really lucky for me to be able to have colleagues and managers who supported me through that. So I blogged about it, and then I was inundated. So literally hundreds and hundreds of people got in touch with me on the back of that from across the Home Office. And they were saying, thank you for talking about cancer. Nobody ever talks about cancer. People can't say the word, let alone talk about it. I've had cancer and I didn't talk to anyone about it. Or I'm a carer of somebody with cancer. Or even I'm a line manager and I'm sitting here crying because I don't know what to do for the person that I'm here to look after as their manager. So it was huge. It suddenly kind of became this really, really big thing that I hadn't expected. And I knew as a senior manager that I couldn't unsee what I'd seen. It wouldn't have mattered actually what grade I was. That wasn't about that. But I felt an absolute responsibility that these people had taken the time to come to me, to tell me their stories, to tell me that they didn't feel that they were being supported and that they felt really alone. And so I knew that at that point then that would be it. Something else had to happen. And that's where the embryo of the Working Through Cancer Network began, because I sat there and I said, what can I do to make sure that that isn't going to continue? So I decided that I needed to have an army of activists. So these people who come to me, I went back to them, I had chats with them, and then I said, is anyone here prepared to help me make a change? And about 50 people came back and said, yes, I will come and help you do whatever you want me to do. So we created a group. We figured out what's missing. What do we really need? And in the early days, we thought, well, we need buddy groups. That's what we actually need. We need people who just get it. All you need on really bad days at work is to go to somebody who has had cancer, has cared for someone with cancer, or has line managed someone with cancer. And that might be enough to get you through the day. They won't solve your problems, but they will get it enough that you feel like this is okay and it's normal. But when we were doing that, we started to realize that line managers were feeling really under-resourced. They weren't confident or capable to deal with this kind of situation. So we worked with Macmillan and we created a co-designed session to build line manager confidence and capability. That took us a while to do, but it's a 2-hour session. It's interactive, it has videos, there's lots of breakout discussions, and we have people who are trained, it's a train the trainer session. So we now have people who are trained and they train hundreds and hundreds of people across organisations about cancer in the workplace. That was a really big breakthrough moment because we were getting amazing feedback from people about that. And then the final thing was a one-stop shop. So the other thing that people say is when you've been diagnosed with something like cancer, it takes over everything that you're thinking. And when someone says, just go on the intranet and look at this policy or find that thing, you get inundated with, 20 pages in and you still haven't found what you want. And it's really, really hard. So people said to us, can we just have one page where everything is there, where it shows us the policies that we need to look at? It links to the employee assistance program or the civil service charity or Macmillan, and it also has case studies and links to a buddy group. So we did that. So we created that as well. And then we ran it. So we literally created that in the Home Office, launched it in a big launch event, and suddenly it kept growing. So everybody was using it. We ended up training thousands of people on the training session. We had lots of buddy groups going on, and it felt like a really good thing that we were doing. And then I thought that that's probably it. I thought, well, that's great. That's a really nice thing that we've created. And it was by people for people. So no big strategies, but just this big supportive network of people who wanted to help their colleagues. And then I was asked to go and speak at the Civil Service Disability Champions Board. And just to share what we were doing, and Sir Philip Rutnam asked if we would go and do it. He was disability champion at the time. So I went and did a presentation on it. And after that, I was then contacted by lots of different departments, government departments, who said, can we do what you've done? We haven't got what you've got. We'd like to replicate it. And before I knew it, I became the chair of a cross-government network, which now has more than 20 departments, all in the network, all of us working together. Lots of people have replicated the exact offer in their own departments, and others have got their own versions, and we all come together to share best practice. And that culminated in February in our first ever whole civil service Confident About Cancer Day. It was opened by John Manzoni. We had amazing speakers, guest panelists. We had people all over the world tweeting from embassies saying that they were part of the day. And it was not a taboo subject. It was, everybody was talking really openly about it. There were tears, there was laughter, but it really felt like everyone was finally getting the message that this is something that we need to talk openly about, support people on, and just get on with, normalize the conversation. So that felt amazing. And we were so pleased with everything that happened that day. And then lockdown happened. Well, I won't tell you about lockdown just yet, but if you want to ask me about lockdown, I can tell you what we had to do next, but that's kind of where we got to. I think when I was diagnosed in 2016, I would never have looked forward a few years and anticipated the scale of what's now happened from that first blog that I wrote whilst I was in the middle of my treatment. So it was like the worst news of my life by far, but it created something that hopefully is really helpful to a lot of people across the civil service. So in some ways it's been balanced out slightly by what happened since, but it's certainly been a bit of a journey, I would say.
Shona, thank you so much for sharing your story, and I think it's incredible, and it's a testimony to your humanity and your leadership that you could recruit such an army for such a worthwhile project and cause. So thank you. So Shona, when you meet new people who may not know about your condition and how it affects you, how do you raise the subject? Are you very upfront, or do you wait until it comes up naturally? And connected to that, how do you begin conversations with a new line manager or employer?
Thanks, Jenna. So I guess I would say it depends on the situation. So I don't want people to just see me as Shona, the person that's linked to cancer, because that ultimately wouldn't be something that I would like every conversation to start with, but I am upfront about it. So if the timing feels right and I'm talking to someone, I'll be the first person to ask the question about disability inclusion and opportunities if I'm in a meeting and it feels relevant. I'm really happy to be visible, so I'll write articles and blogs. I'm doing this right now. I'm happy to tell my story if telling my story helps other people feel confident to share theirs or to get support. So I really think if it helps D&I, I'll be upfront and open, but I certainly don't ever think that it has to be everything that I do. I don't just want to be associated for my disability. I think when I talk to a new manager, I do say it quite early on, but normally it's because I just want them to know that it doesn't stop me from doing my job to the best of my ability. It's just that sometimes I might need workplace adjustments that help me to do what I need to do. And everybody, for lots of different reasons, might need adjustments. We have flexible working for that reason. People have caring responsibilities. People are parents and choose to have different patterns. It's not because you have a disability that this is a problem. I think it's just a part of who we are, and we should always bring our whole self to work. So I think that's how I try and approach it. I think partly as well, I see that I've got a privileged position being in the senior civil service. So with that comes responsibility. So I think I have to show that this matters. And to do that, I have to be open and honest. I have to be open about bringing my whole self to work, and hopefully that encourages others to do the same. So that's kind of the motto that I live by on that.
Thank you, Shona. Now, before we ask you for some career advice, here are some quick fire questions. Best piece of advice you have received?
Okay. Best piece of advice I have received is be yourself. That sounds very simple, but I would say, especially if we're looking at career progression, people try and be a person that they think fits the grade, the role, the culture of what they're trying to become. And so it's tiring to keep up a pretense. Trying to be a person that is the person you think you should be, but it isn't really you, over time is draining and actually is therefore counterproductive. So the most important thing is the best leaders are those that are confident in their own story and experience. What do you bring that adds value? We all bring something different. So what you need to do is capitalize on why you are important and valuable, and don't try and conform to be somebody else.
Thank you. Best gift you've ever received?
So I was trying to think about this one because I've got a cheesy answer, which is no evidence of disease, being told that by my surgeon. That was a really important day for me. But I've got probably an even cheesier one. I think my family would find this cheesy as well. But the one that made me cry was after my diagnosis, I was given an eternity ring by my husband and my children when I was going through my treatment. And they said, whatever happens next, they wanted me to know that they'd love me forever. And that made a really big difference to me at that point. So that was a really lovely gift to get at just the right time.
Not cheesy at all. That's lovely. Right. Name a book that you have read that has positively shaped you.
So I'm an avid reader. I'm part of a book club. So I read lots and lots of books a year. All the time I'm reading. I've got a bookcase behind me. You can't really see it, but that's one of two bookcases. So I do have a lot of books. I was trying to think about something that has actively shaped me. So not in the disability sense, but certainly in terms of really my thinking and really challenging my views and opinions. So I mentioned at the start that I was on the Windrush Lessons Learned review, and that was a really important year for me because as a civil servant, but also as somebody who is white and has white privilege from that perspective, it really made me challenge my views and opinions. And I read lots of books during that period. I read books about Windrush, about the empire, about the slave trade. And it really opened my eyes to some things that I thought I knew, but actually I didn't. I just knew what I'd heard. And so I think one of the most provoking ones was a book called Natives by Akala, a British author, talked about growing up in Britain as a Black person. And it's a modern book. It's based on my generation. So all the reference points, the cultural reference points, were points that I knew and recognised. And I think because of that, that really hit home to me. So I always like to think that I'm a listening and learning person, and that I try to then actively change my behaviours if those behaviours aren't right. And I think that's something that I learned a lot. So I think that made a big impact on me.
Thank you. And it's also very topical right now. If you could have 3 people over for dinner, who would they be?
So that's a tough choice, isn't it? There are so many people that I really respect and that I think are fun. I think you should always try and have fun as well. The way that I've thought about this is that it would have to be people that if they're in the news, so whether that's on Twitter or, an account, BBC News, are they the ones that I instantly click on because I'm interested to know what they've done or what they're saying? So that's what I've just based it on. So the 3 people that I can guarantee I'll do that for are Barack Obama, Adele, and David Attenborough. So if those 3 people are in the news, I'm always going to want to hear what they say because they've always got something that interests me about what they're doing. So I think they'd be a great group, actually. I think they'd all get on fine.
Brilliant choice. I'll try and get an invite to that dinner party. Great. Well, you'll be pleased to hear that that's the end of the quick fire questions. Now, if I may, I would like to ask you some questions about career development and disability. Shona, what are your top 3 career tips, either generally or specific to someone with a disability?
Thank you. So I would say only do jobs that energize and interest you, because then you'll deliver your best work. We often learn more from the things that go wrong than the things that go right. So sometimes it's important to take a risk on a role or on something that you're going to try that's different, because it won't last forever. And even if it doesn't work out, you'll learn something from it. Never take a promotion just to get a promotion. If you're going upwards, it should only be because you're ready and because it's the right job for you. Otherwise, it really won't work out. So that would be my top tip.
Thank you. Those are really great pieces of advice. So, Shona, in your own career, is there anything that you would do differently with the benefit of hindsight?
Yes, it's a short answer. There are definitely. I'm always impressed if I hear that people have had a plan and that they've known from the very beginning that they're going to be on this trajectory and that's how their career is going to work. That certainly hasn't been how I've planned my career. I've meandered my way around doing lots of different things, and I think I've enjoyed it because of it. But if I was going to say that there's something I would do differently, it's probably that I wouldn't give myself such a hard time when I've made a mistake. At the time when you've made a mistake at work, it can feel like the worst feeling in the world. We've all had it, the anxiety that something's gone wrong and suddenly either you'll be in trouble or you'll have a lot of work to kind of unpick what's gone wrong. And I think what I've learned over the years is it's okay to make mistakes. We all do. It's much more important that we learn from it, that we try to avoid making the same mistake again, and that we put in place remedial action. So if something goes wrong, it's much more important to hold your hand up and say, yeah, we made a mistake. I think teams feel much more that feels more honest to do that. So don't shy away from it. And actually, one of the best speeches I've ever heard was by a permanent secretary. I won't say her name, but she really inspired me a lot. And she said in this speech that she had made some terrible work-related mistakes over the years, ones that she thought might be career limiting, but it shaped the leader that she is today. So I thought, well, if a permanent secretary can do that and be open about the fact that she makes mistakes, then I can do that and still be a good leader. So I think that really hit home for me. It's okay to make mistakes. It's what you do when the mistakes have happened that make you a leader.
Thank you. So, what's been your biggest setback and how have you come back from it? And how do you generally deal with setbacks?
So it's probably unsurprising that I think my biggest setback was my cancer diagnosis. I think it set me back in so many ways, not just in work. But in terms of my career, I thought that it would be very career limiting because, as I say, I didn't know if I'd be able to ever work again. So at one point, I knew that that was a setback and I wasn't sure if I could get over the setback. It made me reevaluate everything. So what's important in life, health and well-being ultimately are the most important things that we can have. That and the support of our friends and family means more than anything. We can always get a new job if we need to get a new job, but our health really has to be at the forefront at times. So I think once I've embraced that and the fact that I had to look after myself to make sure that I was going to be able to have a career, I think it made me a more confident and calm leader. And so I think now the way that I approach my work is from a sense of supporting people to make sure that health and well-being is important to them and listening if they tell me that they're struggling, because ultimately once we all get over that, everybody feels that they can deliver a better job and therefore have a better work-life balance and generally feel like this is a place they want to be. So I think that's probably how I would say that I've approached it.
Thank you. And what advice would you give to somebody who is suffering from imposter syndrome due to their disability?
Yeah, so imposter syndrome is something that I think a lot of us have felt. I think in particular, I've had that from people who are women quite often, who we give ourselves quite a hard time as we're going up the career ladder. And I'm saying that from a perspective of having had a lot of conversations with women over the years. I think what I would say is, although I don't like using the term brand, I think it's really important that you know your own brand. So when I mentor people, I say to them, although it sounds like a really alien concept, you need to understand who you are and what you bring. The more you know that about yourself, the less you will feel that you're an imposter. So what I mean by that is, what makes you great at what you do? What is it about you? If you could describe yourself in 5 key skills, behaviors, knowledge, what would it be? And therefore, what do you bring? So what means that you add value to a team or an organization? Don't look at the negatives, look at the positives. What makes you you? Really focus on that. And if you think you bring something different, which I think most of us do, promote it. Join groups and networks that allow you to teach the organisation to know more about what you bring. So you all have value within you, and it's how you show people that you're confident about that and you know it about yourself. And the more you do that, the less you'll feel that somebody's going to find you out, because there's nothing to find out. You're just bringing something different.
Thank you. That's brilliant advice. So, Seonaid, can you tell us about one particular civil service initiative for disabled staff that has either helped you to progress your career or that you think would make an impact on others?
So I'm a really big fan of talent management. It's something that has been a passion of mine actually since I first became a manager and realised that you had the power to support people and build their confidence to achieve what they wanted to. So I was on the FLS, the Future Leaders Scheme, which isn't a disability scheme, but I found it a really, really good way to meet lots of people from lots of different backgrounds and to see the future of the senior civil service. But in terms of a disability related initiative, I have been a mentor on the Aspire scheme, which came out about 18 months, 2 years ago, which is focused on grade 6s and 7s with a disability, helping them to progress to senior civil service. So as a mentor on that scheme, I found it really lovely to build the confidence and to reduce perceptions of barriers for people who have a disability getting to the senior civil service. And I would say that a lot of people think that disability becomes more invisible with senior civil servants because a lot of people aren't prepared to stand up and say that they have a disability, which is a really personal choice. So I think me being a mentor on that felt like a positive step in the right direction. And I think that helped me as well to feel like I was bringing the talent and the future succession up through the ranks, which is a really important thing. So I want to find the new future leaders. So that was a really good opportunity for me. I think as well, something that, and it's not an initiative, but the Civil Service Disability and Inclusion Awards. So last year, the Working Through Cancer Network won the Championing Disability Award, which was a real surprise to us. We didn't think that we would be anywhere near the winners. It was an amazing group of people at the award ceremony. But winning the award really did help put the visibility of the network and then me in that environment on the map. And what that enabled me to do was to have a bigger presence and to talk about cancer in the workplace and to join more groups and to have a better, more positive influence. So although it wasn't an initiative, it was, it was an environment that enabled me then to say, this matters, let's talk about this, let's not brush it under the carpet. So I think, again, sometimes it's about getting the visibility, and once you've got that, how you use it, how do you capitalize on the opportunity that you've now got? So that's what I'm trying to do.
Thank you and congratulations. So Shona, we've touched on this before, but given the current extraordinary circumstances that we find ourselves in due to the pandemic, I'd like to ask you some questions on working during COVID-19. So first of all, I assume the answer to the first question is yes, but are you working from home during the COVID-19 pandemic? If so, what's your home office like? And what is the most unexpected thing we might find if we let the camera see around your home office?
Thank you. So yes, I am definitely working from home, and I have a small study which I'm sitting in to do this today. What's the most unusual thing that you would see? I've mentioned that I have hundreds of books, so I think potentially it would just feel like you're in a library, because I'm slightly obsessed by reading. So it might not be unusual to have in a study, but certainly I think you'd find something for everybody in my book collection. So maybe you could take one of my books.
With pleasure, thank you. So has working from home made life easier for you, more difficult for you? Has there been a difference? And if you'd like to tell us a bit about how you've continued your Working Through Cancer network work during this time, that would be great.
So I think, having spoken to colleagues, I think this feels quite similar to them. It has made it easier in a lot of ways. So I previously had a commute that added up to 3 hours a day, and not having to commute for those 3 hours has meant that I can focus more time, firstly on work, but secondly on time with my family. So I've really appreciated having those extra hours in the day. I think if I flipped that on its head, what has made it harder is switching off from work. So when your home is also your office, it's much easier for that work-life distancing to kind of bleed into each other. And it's easy to find that you're still working a lot later than you may have done if you were in the office and having to catch a train. So I think one of the things I've had to try and be careful of is the fact that I can slip quite easily into the longer days. From Working Through Cancer, we have absolutely had to think about how we work. So we had huge plans. This is the year of inclusion, the civil service year of inclusion, and we were really keen to be a big part of that. And as I mentioned before, we started off with a bang with our Confident About Cancer Day, the whole civil service. That was in early February, and that was the start of our big year. And then suddenly lockdown happened, and a lot of our members suddenly found themselves in either vulnerable or shielded groups because of treatment that was ongoing, or because of post-treatment conditions that they have now for the rest of their life. And so what we had to do was say, we can't do these big events. It's not all about big visibility and kind of making people learn lessons about cancer in the workplace. What matters most now is support. So we really pared down what we offered as a network to fortnightly catch-ups. So we meet up every 2 weeks without fail. Anyone who wants to dial in, and we talk about everything. We talk about HR policies and whether they're working or not. We talk about cancer and things that have been in the news. We talk about fun things, weird things that people have been doing, but just anything to make people feel like they're still part of a group that cares is what we do. And then we've also set up a shielded and vulnerable buddy group. So I already mentioned that we have buddy groups, but this one's specifically for people who can't leave their house, people who potentially can't even hug their own children because they're in the shielded category. And so to talk to a group of people who just get it can make all the difference. So that is 2 of our members who are shielding have come together and have offered that across the whole civil service. And so it's much more about the here and now. It's about today, it's about this week, it's about showing that we are here for people. And the big stuff will come. It will come back again. We have lots of plans of things we want to do, but that can wait. Right now, it's just about people feeling that we're there for them.
Thank you. And do you have any tips for our members on how to make remote working a better experience where perhaps it's not as easy for them?
Yes. So I mentioned about people who are shielded or vulnerable, and that creates an extra layer of challenge from working from home, because one of the top tips that I would say if you aren't shielding is to factor in breaks. So even if you're shielding, of course, factor in breaks. But what I like to do is go out for a walk. So just 30 minutes to just leave your phone, don't look at anything, and go out for that walk can make a really, really big difference. So I know that it's something that sounds really obvious, but once you're in that zone that I talked about before, where you've got that, your home is your office, it's very easy to still find yourself sitting in the same place 8 hours after you sat down. So I'd say you have to force yourself really to take breaks. And I think I talked before about working late, and I've been reflecting on it. And I think one of the things is, don't give yourself a hard time for working late, because sometimes that just has to happen. And if it's easier and you're in the zone and the flow, keep it going. But do make sure you take time off to compensate. So one of the best things that I've found is going on holiday is not something that's possible right now. And I know a lot of people had holidays planned with family and friends that they can't take. But I've found that even taking a long weekend, so taking a Friday or a Monday off and having that longer period to not be in office, can actually regenerate you and rejuvenate you before you come back to the workplace again. So even if you can't go anywhere, don't let that stop you taking time off. We all need to take breaks. And I think that's the way to get through it, really.
That's great advice. Thank you. And In general, Shona, how do you think lockdown is affecting people with disabilities specifically?
So I've mentioned a little bit about this, but probably if I build on it a bit. So there's positives and negatives, I think. And I've been part of a few round tables and disability discussions recently. So I feel like I'm validated in some of this because it's come up in those as well. So I think inclusion is much more of an expectation now. It's been a level playing field, hasn't it? So before, where you had people who were always in the office versus people who had to spend time at home or chose to work from home, there was often an imbalance in how that worked in practice. And I think what this has enabled is that inclusion is now the norm. So lots of people are having to have workplace adjustments for various reasons, whether that's physical or kind of hours and flexible working related. So I think disabled colleagues aren't feeling as different in inverted commas, and actually that has been quite empowering. And it's not about them needing special treatment or them needing workplace adjustments. Everybody is having that happen to them. And I think people are starting to empathise now with disabled colleagues and the things that we have gone through for years. So I think in some ways that has been quite empowering and a confidence builder for disabled colleagues. I think lack of travel, I've heard, for me it's true, but for others I've heard, has been really, really good, because the health risks quite often of travelling, whether that's fatigue that it creates or because of the risk of disease as you're travelling, again, has kind of given people a sense of kind of a lack of anxiety that could happen. And I think that has also enabled disabled colleagues to feel healthier in that sense, which is really good. I think the negatives, so I mentioned before about shielding and about vulnerable people, and I know and quite a few of our network members have said that it's lonely. Of course it is if you're isolating, especially if you're isolating and you live alone. So one of our network members lives alone in her flat and hadn't seen anybody for 6 weeks. So she wasn't allowed to answer the door. She had literally no interaction with people other than virtually. And that's really hard on anyone's mental health. So I think there is a big risk of loneliness, and, a big risk of people as well not having the setup that they need. So if we looked at physically, people have offices. If you have a disability and you work in an office, quite often that has been set up very well for you. So you have everything how you need it. Then suddenly you're at home and you might not even have a desk. So I know people who are working sitting on the edge of their bed or sitting on their sofa. And if you've got a disability, that can just amplify the fact that this isn't really a workable solution. So I know a lot of people as well have found that really difficult. So the importance of having good policies in place that enable you to get the right equipment can't be underplayed. We need to really support people to make sure that they can get through this.
Thanks, Shona. I agree with everything that you said there. So finally, what's the most important piece of advice you'd like to leave us with today?
Okay, so if I'm allowed to, I have 3 pieces of advice. They're all short. So it's really summarising what I've talked about today. So health is a leveller. It can bring people together from all different grades, roles and backgrounds, and that's a good thing. So there's very little that brings us all together in a way where we can understand each other. It doesn't matter if you're the most senior person in the organisation or the most junior, you could buddy up on a health-related condition that you both share. And I think that's a lovely thing and we should capitalise on it. I think people are more than their disabilities. So I think it's really important that we're confident to speak up about disability, but no one should define us based on them. And finally, I think this is my big thing. If you're really passionate about a topic, go for it. People who really care about a subject make change happen. We're seeing that all over the world right now. You have to passionately love what you do. And if you care about something, you will make the change happen. So go for it.
Shona, thank you. It has been a real privilege to hear you speak about your remarkable journey. Thank you for being so honest and open about your experiences. Your positivity is infectious, and your success both in your career and through the Working Through Cancer network is really inspirational. Learning about what has worked for you and what you would do differently with the benefit of hindsight, and also the top tips that you have shared, have been incredibly useful. I'm certain that what you have said will resonate with a lot of our members, but more importantly, it will empower us and inspire us to progress and develop our careers further and ultimately reach those senior grades. I know you've certainly given me a lot of food for thought for my own career development, and I will be checking out your book recommendation, Native. So on behalf of REACH, the Senior Disability Network, thank you so much for taking part in this virtual interview today and for being so willing to share your experiences and insights with us. Thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you for watching. Look out for the next part in the series, Empowering Disabled Staff to Reach Senior Grades, brought to you by REACH, the Civil Service Senior Disability Network.